The rules of React. A set of rules to help you use React as intended and write well-organized, safe, and composable apps. These have been around for a while now, acting as a set of strong suggestions, but ultimately not strictly enforced in your apps. Until now, the React compiler is coming, and it makes these rules real and more enforceable. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's a good forcing function to help us all avoid anti-patterns and write better code, and it'll instantly bring massive performance gains to a majority of React apps. And it is also opt-in. You don't necessarily need to adopt the React compiler day one if you aren't ready, unless you happen to maintain a very big library that a lot of people rely on. So I chatted with Tyler Williams, maintainer of a very big state management library called MobX-State-Tree, and the challenges that they faced as React compiler comes out, and they learned that technically they've been breaking the rules of React this whole time. Can you give your elevator pitch for MobX-State-Tree?
Yeah, MobX-State-Tree. I call it like a luxury car. It's really like a batteries included framework for state management, but it's built on top of MobX. And MobX is like the engine, right? One of the advantages of MobX is that it's super fast, it's extremely flexible, it offers kind of a different paradigm from Redux. 5 to 7 years ago, that was kind of the dominant framework. And so MobX offered a different path forward for reactive and functional programming, but it was a little too flexible. And so MobX-State-Tree puts structure around MobX, and that allows teams to collaborate better than they would with just MobX.
Would you call yourself the lead maintainer now?
I usually say I'm one of the core maintainers, but that's pretty. I'm the person who most often like presses the merge button.
That's how I knew you before we worked together. You're the MobX-State-Tree guy.
That's me.
Yeah. I heard some chatter a few months ago. We knew that React compiler was coming. That got announced, and I heard some chatter that might be a little problematic. And that chatter, I think, continued to devolve a bit where it might be a little bit in trouble. Can you talk about how you first learned about some of these challenges and what we're dealing with?
Yeah, this was also a surprise to me. So MobX-State-Tree, other observable libraries like them, so RxJS is one of them, they often use this pattern where you take your React components and you wrap them in a higher order component. It's usually called observer. And that's how you get access to the fine-grained reactive updates from state.
The observer pattern for the React community, I feel like it's not quite as popular as some other frameworks. Is that true? Would you say that's true?
That's super true. And it's funny, there's been a lot of conversation in the MobX community about this as well. Many years ago, people were asking for a use observer hook, right? The MobX maintainers generally have not been in favor of it, primarily because the position has always been that, well, observer works just fine. It felt at the time that was primarily a matter of taste. And so what's been happening is as the React compiler has become public, it's in public beta, it has come up that there are libraries out there, they sort of like obfuscate away these rule-breaking behaviors. So like no user, if you write the observer higher order component in your code, you don't really see how it's breaking the rules. There's never really been a way to enforce that because there wasn't a compiler and there wasn't even the compiler lint rule set. But now both of those things exist, and we can verify that like these observer higher order components are definitely in violation of the rules. It's kind of been like, oh, whoa, like does MobX-State-Tree just like not work with the compiler at all? And that's almost the state of things today. It's a little more optimistic than that these days, but for a while that's kind of what it looked like.
Do all higher order components break the rules of React now?
No, definitely not. This is the observer components in our case do a couple of things. Two important things that break the rules here is like one, when the render function happens, stuff happens as side effects, and rendering is supposed to be pure. That's a rule of React. So that breaks one, and then there's some other stuff where the observer like kind of like reaches into React internals and like triggers these updates. Like React, basically we take away control from React. One of the reasons the compiler is so important, especially as like concurrent rendering comes through, is like React really wants to understand everything it's rendering and why, and the observer in the way that it currently operates kind of like obfuscates that from React. So React has no idea what's going on and can't do the correct things.
That's interesting, though. MobX-State-Tree optimizing for render performance is kind of doing some of the same stuff that React is doing, but because it's doing it in its own observer higher order component world, and React doesn't have insight into that, React compilers like, I don't know what to do with this. Is that basically the deal?
Yeah. Yeah, and fortunately, it's not like the React compiler won't compile if you have MobX or MobX-State-Tree as a dependency. It'll still compile it, but when it encounters that observer component, it'll like skip it. It just like won't do the thing on that component or its children. And for the most part, when you write a code base with a lot of MobX and MobX-State-Tree in it, you just end up kind of like wrapping everything in observer higher order components.
Yeah,
So
I was told to
most people just
basically
do
use it everywhere. Yeah.
So if most of your code base is wrapped in observer, and if React compiler is going to basically skip those, any opportunity to memoize or get like nice use callbacks happening, all of those opportunities are sort of gone. So you're leaving a lot of optimizations on the table just for wrapping your components in this higher order component observer.
So what's the impact of this? I guess what's your path forward? How are you handling this at the moment?
I had a couple conversations with the React team just like on Twitter. I wrote a blog post back in September. My initial path was like, oh, what if we changed React to do this? And that's like a really tall order, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a lot. I'm hopeful that someday there will be a path forward there. And I think as browsers investigate and like maybe eventually ship like signals, I think maybe there's a world where the use function is used to unwrap observable values. I don't think that it makes sense for the ecosystem to like change React to adapt to MobX and MobX-State-Tree, right? I think it's like kind of the consensus, right? But as that became a non-starter, I wasn't sure where to go next, and so we actually started thinking about and talking about like, okay, well, if MobX and MobX-State-Tree are going to be sort of left behind in a React compiler world, what replaces them? We've looked at strong candidates like Zustand and Jotai and
there's a bunch of options.
there's a ton. Yeah, there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are quite good. And I was thinking about like why they're quite good, and a lot of them are very like React-y, so they're like built on top of the context API. And that's part of what makes them really powerful and really like interesting in the React world. And MobX-State-Tree, its strength is that it doesn't really know anything about React. That's what's really cool about it. Like, as a fun tidbit, like you can run MobX-State-Tree in Node or Bun. It doesn't need to know anything about browsers, doesn't need to know anything about JSX, doesn't need to know anything about React. It's very standalone. It's super cool, right? But that also means that it stands alone when it comes to these conversations. like we're not like tightly integrated, right? So like when React moves, like we have to kind of like run a little bit faster to keep up. But all that to come back to the point is I was thinking about these libraries and what they did well. And I was like, what if I made a Rube Goldberg machine that was just like a bunch of use states and use effects inside a trench coat? And
that's what all the other ones are anyways.
Yeah, right.
That's what React Query is anyways.
So we have a hook now that works for most of what you would need out of MobX-State-Tree observable values. One of the saving graces here, MobX-State-Tree allows you to treat mutations of state immutably. I can get an immutable snapshot with just plain values. I can watch that and I can update through, again, this kind of right now Rube Goldberg machine of React hooks. I can get the fine-grained reactivity by looking and observing to kind of get those values into React in a hook way. Okay. It's not a drop-in replacement, but it is a small code modification.
That's good news. I actually thought that it would be a little bit harder.
So yeah, it's not ready for production use, but I don't think it's far off. I think once we get some feedback, I intend to build out some tests, maybe some benchmarks too, to make sure that there's no weird performance implications here, right? My focus right now is minimizing migration risk for people who have already made this choice. A lot of them are our clients at Infinite Red. A lot of them are my friends and colleagues at former companies that used it, and just people I know through the community, right? I think the MobX-State-Tree team, myself and the other folks who are involved in it, we don't have an obligation to fix this, but if we wanted to say that we did an excellent job fulfilling our responsibility, then I think that we have to figure out a path forward. The React team has absolutely crushed it in terms of an adoption path for the compiler, which makes this problem more pressing for me to solve. I want to be ready when React compiler is out of beta and people are toggling it on. I want to be ready to have a stronger answer than like, oh, I have this like funky little hook that might work. I'm gonna have something more compelling at that point. That's my goal.
I think that's why this story was interesting in the first place for me, is because all that I've assumed and heard is that this React compiler is kind of a slam dunk. It's like,
it's awesome.
You should absolutely put it in your project. There's no reason not to.
Yeah.
And then you're here being like, oh man, you're reading the tea leaves and being like, when this happens, There's gonna be a lot of people that need
Yeah.
something from me. So you're really just
Right.
trying to get ahead of it, is what it sounds like, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't want to be an asterisk in that story for a bunch of people who have trusted the code that I am responsible for.
But it does give you quite the challenge, and
Yeah.
we appreciate it. All of the open source contributors that are working hard to make it seem seamless, even though
Yeah.
software is hard. Do you have
Yeah.
anything else that you want to bring up?
I think I can say another sound biteable thing here, just that if you're someone who is using MobX-State-Tree today, I don't think you should panic. I don't think you should worry too much about it. One, the React compiler is not totally ready for public usage yet, so I wouldn't be turning it on today in production in a variety of apps. If you are adventurous and you're doing that today, come reach out, and I'm happy to talk you through what I have and collaborate. If you're going to wait until React compiler is marked ready for production, at that point, again, I'll have a stronger answer about what MobX-State-Tree can do. I think the worst case scenario there is that I have a little bit of a clunky patch that's kind of a workaround, but it'll hold you over while you figure out what else you want to do about it, right? Like it'll keep things working and allow you to opt into the React compiler for most of your code base. And in the best case scenario, which I'm quite optimistic about, I'll have a 3-line code mod that basically just works, right? And so you
Nice.
can just keep on plugging away. So I don't think there's so much cause for distress. I know I was distressed for some amount of time myself, but my attitude has changed just through kind of a little bit of additional work. So
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Tyler.
go find me on GitHub. If you go to the MobX-State-Tree repository, you'll see my face all over it. I'm very responsive on email, and I always do this as like a little filter. Is like I don't tell people what my email is. It's extremely easy to guess or find on GitHub. So I'm like, if you go find it on GitHub and send me an email, I'll get right back to you. And again, I'm Cool Software Tyler on GitHub. I'm coolsoftware.dev at Blue Sky. And then, yeah, you can send me an email if you want to talk more about MobX-State-Tree, MobX, this little hook that I've got, or just in general, what's going on, open source, or just want to say hi.
So yeah, fun conversation with Tyler. Mad respect for all the open source maintainers out there. If you're curious and want to learn more about any of the technical details, we'll post Tyler's blog post and other info about MobX-State-Tree in the description. For those still watching by this point, first, thank you. Second, I guess I should ask you to subscribe. I make fun and insightful videos about my corner of the tech universe, things I find interesting, and all the fun little projects I do along the way. Cheers.